Hey y'all, this is Bloodstream Media founder Patrick James Lynch chiming in to welcome you to the first Ask the Expert podcast hosted by my good friend and bleeding disorders community titan. That's right, he's a BD titan, Chris Bombardier. Chris is an incredible guy with boundless energy for the global bleeding disorders community. I know you're in for a treat with him as your host, and he's kicking off his reign here with an excellent guest in New England Hemophilia Association Executive Director Rich Pezzillo talking about advocacy and community engagement. This is a great episode, and I know you're really going to like having Chris as your new host. Two other exciting updates for the Ask the Expert podcast. As you might know or have realized, we haven't had a sponsor for the first 11 episodes of the Ask the Expert podcast. It was something we at Believe Limited launched because, like with our comedy web series Stop the Bleeding or our other podcasts, we simply thought it needed to exist, so we got to work making it happen. But ultimately, we were going to need sponsorship in order to keep bringing you expert interviews with people like Dr. Guy Young, Dr. Stephen Pipe, Lori Kelly, and Katie Verb. So it gives me great pride to be able to say that this podcast is brought to you by the good people at Living with Hemophilia, the online hemophilia community brought to you by Bayer. Living with Hemophilia is the destination of choice for a plethora of useful info, like medical and non-medical tips, helpful advice, information on programs for all ages and stages, leadership opportunities and initiatives, sewing patterns, and videos, the best videos. And because it's on the internet, it's easy to find. Simply type in livingwithhemophilia.com into your search bar, and there you are. Thank you, Internet. Join Bayer's community of fellow hemophilia patients, caregivers, and advocates as they put the live in living with hemophilia. You can even like them on Facebook. That's even better because then you can use emojis on their Facebook page and receive all the latest updates. So check out Living with Hemophilia. And before you wish happy birthday to some friend from the third grade or share a funny meme about cats and Mondays, head over to Facebook and like Bayer's Living with Hemophilia page. You'll be glad you did. Last piece of news, and then we'll kick it over to Chris. Just like all of Bloodstream Media's podcasts, the Ask the Expert podcast is now available on Spotify. So take a second to head on over to subscribe to the Ask the Expert podcast if you haven't already subscribed on iTunes, Stitcher, or your preferred podcast player. Of course, you can also find links to subscribe to Ask the Expert and all of Bloodstream Media's podcasts for the bleeding disorders community at bloodstreammedia.com. All right, now on to episode 12 with your host, Chris Bombardier. Enjoy.
Advocacy, simply defined, is the public support for or recommendation of a particular cause or policy. But in the bleeding disorder community, it can be so much more than that. Advocacy is constantly addressed at local chapter meetings and throughout the national conferences, but many find it a daunting task to be one. With the current uncertainty around access to healthcare in the United States, advocating for our community's needs has become even more important. So, for episode 12 of Ask the Expert, we're hoping to bring a little more clarity around what it means to be an advocate and provide some suggestions on how to start your path towards becoming one. To help with that, we have the Executive Director of the New England Hemophilia Association and advocacy superstar, Rich Pezzillo, joining us. But before we get going, you might notice that I'm not Patrick James Lynch. My name is Chris Bombardier, and I'm really excited to be the new host for Ask the Expert. Some of you may have heard from me on a few of the Bloodstream podcasts, mostly talking about climbing some mountains around the world, and while that has been a huge focus of mine over the past decade, I actually have a pretty diverse background in our community that I hope helps me be a really great host for this show. Just to quickly recap that experience, I myself have severe hemophilia B. I used to work in medical research at the Hemophilia Treatment Center here in Denver, Colorado. I have been a camp counselor at several camps all around the country, and I have served on the board of directors for my local hemophilia chapter, and I currently serve on the board of directors for Save One Life, an international hemophilia nonprofit that helps individuals with hemophilia in developing countries. I currently work for an experience-based education company called Gut Monkey. Yes, you heard that right, it's Gut Monkey, where we mainly do work with participants that have chronic medical conditions. And finally, I'm working on getting my master's in global health. So I have a pretty diverse background, which will hopefully help me engage a wide variety of guests and provide you guys with some really cool information. So with that, please feel free to send suggestions for guests and topics to mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com. Let's start our conversation with Rich Pezzillo. So we're really fortunate to have many great advocates in our bleeding disorder community, and Rich Pezzillo is definitely one of them. So Rich is currently the executive director of the New England Hemophilia Association, lovingly known as NEHA. He previously served as the communications director for the Hemophilia Federation of America, and previously worked for Senator Whitehouse as his press secretary. This is just a brief summary, and I'll kind of let Rich fill us in more.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Chris. Super excited to be a part of this.
So first off, can you give us a little background about who you are and what you currently do?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the introduction there. I don't think I consider myself as a young adult anymore. I think I've blown past those ages. But as an adult living with hemophilia, it's always kind of been at the heartbeat when you talk about advocacy of who we are and what we do. I went to school to be a meteorologist, so I wanted to be a weatherman, which is what I thought I was going to be doing at this point in my life, is forecasting the weather on TV, giving viewers the highs and lows of the day and the precipitation forecast. But I think having a chronic condition like hemophilia often redirects your life and kind of brings it back to the mission, which is when I get involved with the NHF's Youth Leadership Institute, the NYLI. I was actually involved with it before it was called NYLI. It was called the Task Force back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And through that experience of going to Washington Days and going to other advocacy events kind of opened up a door that I didn't quite know what was going to open. So from there, the door that was open was a internship on Capitol Hill for Senator Whitehouse. I interned there for 6 months. It was a press internship, so I was helping to write articles and press advisories, and from there I kind of worked my way up and was offered a press assistant position and then a press secretary position. So I worked there, as you mentioned, for a number of years, and it was a great opportunity, and then worked for the Hemophilia Federation of America as their marketing director, and then now I'm honored to be helping to lead the New England Hemophilia Association.
That's a pretty interesting path from meteorologist to executive director. I just found it really interesting when I was doing some research about this, that you did work for a senator in D.C. What were some of the big takeaways from that experience in general?
Yeah, so I think that, it's super interesting being on this side of the table. And what this side of the table means now is we are advocates for the bleeding disorder community, go to Washington, D.C., and we're one of the many appointments that is listed on the schedule. The schedule for an elected official is packed with advocates and individuals coming in, sometimes by the half hour, by the hour. So when I worked there, it was the complete opposite. I was the one looking at the schedule and going into meetings that were applicable and that I was asked to attend versus the one arranging the trips and going down for these specific meetings. And I think, the unique experience that I see now is coming at it from both sides. So often when you go down to Washington Days or you go to your local state capital, a lot of families that I've talked to have said, oh, well, I'm not meeting with the senator or the state rep, or I'm just meeting with the staff. And I always say to them, I said, the staff is really the heartbeat of the organization. The staff is really what makes the recommendations to the elected official on which way they should, support or not support something, or maybe take action on it. And that's really kind of where the meat and potatoes lie. So meeting with staff is not a bad thing. It's actually, I think, a really good thing. And then the elected official, if they can pop in or not, is always icing on the cake. But I think working for a member of Congress in particular in Washington, D.C., really opened up a lot of opportunities in the sense of the ability for me to think on my feet, to meet deadlines, to always look outside of, other options that are out there, to kind of never take no for an answer. When you're working for an elected official, there's always different routes to get to the end result of trying to listen to constituents and do many other different paths. I just had a conversation with a teenager, and they were kind of lost as to what their next step was once they graduate high school. And I said, don't underestimate an unpaid internship of whether it's going to DC or working or applying for a state internship with an elected official, because you will learn things that textbooks definitely can't teach you.
I love hearing this from your perspective, since you've kind of been on both sides of this experience. I went to Washington Days one time, and I found walking into senators' offices and, just meeting with their staff members extremely intimidating. I think the doors are specifically designed to kind of make you feel very small walking into offices. Do you have any tips or tricks that kind of could help someone navigate that feeling of meeting with your representatives?
I will say, as someone that worked on Capitol Hill for 5 years, it was still intimidating for me to walk through the security metal detectors and walk into an office when you know for a Senate it's one of 100 people in the country, or for the House of Representatives it's one of only a couple of hundred people in the country. But I think, for anyone that has never stepped foot inside of a state house or a governor's office, or has flown to D.C. and walked through the doors, I think the thing that is so awesome about our government in the United States is that there's accessibility. These are public buildings that you can walk through. The staff may be in suit and dress nicely, but at the end of the day, they want to learn. They want to listen. Although it's only a set amount of time, I think that understanding that they're there regardless of what political affiliation they may be on either side of the aisle is that they want to understand and learn. And our community has such a powerful story of where we were 50 years ago, where we are today, and what has happened from point A to point B. And that's up to our community to help educate some of this. The high cost, the infusions through, intravenous, the obstacles that, each individual person and the personal stories that it takes, I think is really what makes having hemophilia and other types of bleeding disorders more real. And that really only comes from the patient's stories. So really, they're the ones looking at you as the expert to share your story on why X bill or why these stories could be used down the road in a extremely meaningful example of how to implement legislation, or share stories on the Senate floor or the House floor, or to use during, state bleeding disorder awareness month proclamations or resolutions.
I'm glad that you brought up those state house proclamations and things like that. So I noticed on NEHA's Facebook page, if people haven't followed NEHA on Facebook, you definitely should. They have some really awesome content on there. You guys have had some great success in visiting your state capitals, because I think you guys represent 6 states. Is that correct?
Yep. So we're the only chapter that has the 6 states underneath us.
And you guys have been really successful in getting some proclamations for Bleeding Disorder Awareness Month. So kind of shifting from the national stage to the state stage, why do you think it's important to have those proclamations, and how come you guys have been so successful in all of those situations?
I'm really proud of the coalition that we were able to form. So 2 years ago, the New England Hemophilia Association, in partnership with the Hemophilia Alliance of Maine and the Connecticut Hemophilia Society, came together and said, how can we best work together to address advocacy across 6 states? Because although the states are small, unlike Texas or California or even Colorado, we have 6 different governors, 6 different legislations, 6 different insurance laws and regulations, so it's very complicated. So what we did is we formed the New England Bleeding Disorder Advocacy Coalition, otherwise known as NEBDAC, and we said we want to form a goal of having Bleeding Disorder Awareness Month in March of 2017 declared in all 6 of the New England states. So that's Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. And NHF and HFA were on these calls, and they kind of shot me an email afterwards and a text message and said, that's a lofty goal. You may want to try to do 3 states or 2 states in the first year. And I said, nope. We're going to do all 6. I have to credit this coalition for working so hard and believing in this goal, because at the end of the month of March, we were able to successfully have all 6 states for the first time ever declare March as Bleeding Disorder Awareness Month. The way that our coalition is set up is we have 2 state volunteers or state leads. These are community members that represent each state. So every state that I listed has 2 volunteer community members. Their roles and responsibilities are to really help us, because they're boots on the ground in all of these various states, to kind of push these tasks at hand forward. So when we applied for Bleeding Disorder Awareness Month, they were the one working with their House of Representatives or their state senators or their governor's office. So for those that don't know, a proclamation and a resolution are very similar in what they do, which is raises awareness. But a proclamation is issued by our governor. A resolution actually has to be passed by a legislative body. So a resolution can be a joint resolution between the House and the Senate, or it could be a House resolution or a Senate resolution. But really, they both do very similar things, which is raise awareness and officially declare something. But I think the thing that was so unique that we didn't just say, great, check the box, let's please, governor or representative, mail us the resolution or proclamation. We went a step further, which I think was, the action advocacy, and did press events. So at every single state capital, we gathered community members, and each event happened at all 6 of the state capitals, had a minimum of 15 people attend, and the most about 30, 35 people attend. And we invited press. We invited everyone to wear a red tie to, kind of mirror the red tie challenge so that, people can ask why you wear a red tie. We asked the legislators that were there, including the governor, to wear a red tie. And it was really neat that many of them did. And then we followed up afterwards, if no press came, and picked each family that was there and shot the photo out to the local paper. So if Johnny is from the local town in Rhode Island, the chances of the local paper picking this up was very high. And what ended up happening is we got 11 news stories out of it, including the AP in Boston picked it up, which then was blasted out to all these places. So I think that advocacy is not just going through and getting the proclamation and resolution done, but it's what do you do with it? And what we did is we created our own story and footprint, and now it was, lasting that as we enter into March 2018, our coalition is active again to get Bleeding Disorder Awareness Month declared, because unfortunately, unlike federal, which is kind of indefinite, that always through HHS will be declared as Bleeding Disorder Awareness Month, on a state level, you have to do it every year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's unless you get some type of, I don't know if it's a law or if it's a resolution that says indefinitely, but all the resolutions and proclamations have to be done yearly. We're up for the challenge, and we're going to do it again this year.
That's awesome. So you're shooting for all 6 states again?
Yeah, all 6 states, and we actually are thinking about, maybe state capitals. Maybe we include proclamations through the mayor's office on the capitals of the 6 states. Are trying to do something a little bit different. These proclamation signings, when the governor comes, usually they have to happen during the week, and we were able to get that good showing. Sometimes these are like 2:00 on a Wednesday afternoon, but our community definitely came out and supported this.
How do you inspire your community to come out and attend these events and be a part of this? I know that I think a lot of states struggle to get that interest and that draw, especially on weekdays, to take a day off of work to go and advocate for this. So what have you done that has really drawn this interest, to doing all of these?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, you bring up a really valid point here is why would someone take kids out of school and take time out of work to show up on a Wednesday afternoon at 2:00? And I think what this has done is for those that have not had the opportunity to go to Washington Days or a state advocacy day, and maybe is a young family that has, a child with a bleeding disorder, or maybe it's someone that hasn't really been active, is what this does, I truly believe, is allows our community to not feel isolated. When you are able to put together an event that says the governor of New Hampshire will be signing a proclamation that officially declares Bleeding Disorder Awareness Month in the Granite State for March of 2018 official, and the governor will be there and signing in his office, I think there's something that helps our community to break away from the we're rare. Because I hear often, how do we compete, and compete's not the right word, against the cancers and diabetes, and we get lost sometimes, with other chronic conditions. And I think that what this does is it allows our community to be empowered to say, we're important and we matter. And if a governor of a state can take time aside to do this, then we're going to show up and support, these initiatives and be part of it. And I will say, Chris, that one of the most amazing things that have happened is the relationships with staff afterwards, is that staff in all of these states have said to us, here's my card. You have a friend in this office now. I actually was at a different event with the governor of New Hampshire 4 months after. And, any governor of any state meets a lot of people, and, it's hard to keep track of names and whatnot. And he certainly didn't remember me. But what he did remember is when I said, Governor, thank you for declaring March as Bleeding Disorder Awareness Month in the state of New Hampshire. He goes, I had no idea how expensive your medicine was as a community, and I had no idea what happened to your community back in the 80s with HIV, AIDS, and hepatitis C. He goes, I will never forget that. And That's exactly what we want. We want our elected officials to understand our community, remember our community, and call upon our community when need be.
So it seems like there has to be a lot of consistency as far as continually going back to meet with representatives. It's not like a one and done kind of thing. Is that kind of what you're saying with that?
Yeah, I think that just like nurturing a relationship with a loved one, whether it's your own child or whether it's your significant other or your parent, it's not just showing up for holidays and saying, hey, how's it going? I love you. But it's nurturing it throughout the year. And I think in the same way, we're nurturing relationships with our elected officials and doing things that they'll remember us by. So when we had the state advocacy days and the Bleeding Disorder Awareness Month, we have a slogan here in New England that has kind of been branded over the past year. It's Wicked Strong Family. So we're building off the Wicked in Boston, and then that we're not just a community, we're a strong family. And we have these stickers, and we have the kids give the legislators and their staff these stickers that say Wicked Strong Family. And Chris, I cannot tell you how many legislators and their staff said, this is going on my wall. One of them put it on their door. And I think whatever we can do to stand out, to create that feeling to the elected officials that says you're making a difference and welcome to our family, I think is a really good thing, because at the end of the day, there will always be bills that are going to be hurting this community and that will support this community. And we're going to need our elected officials and their staff to help us in this journey.
This podcast is brought to you by the good people at Living with Hemophilia, the online community brought to you by Bayer. Living with Hemophilia is the destination of choice for a plethora of useful info like medical and non-medical tips, helpful advice, information on programs for all ages and stages, leadership opportunities and initiatives, sewing patterns, and videos, the best videos. And because it's on the internet, it's easy to find. Simply type livingwithhemophilia.com into your search bar and there you are. Thank you, Internet. Join Bayer's community of fellow hemophilia patients, caregivers, and advocates as they put the live in living with hemophilia. You can even like them on Facebook, and that's even better because then you can use emojis on their Facebook page and receive all the latest updates. So, check out Living with Hemophilia. And before you wish happy birthday to that friend from 3rd grade or share a funny meme about cats and Mondays, head over to Facebook and like Bayer's Living with Hemophilia page. You'll be glad you did.
When you were working in the senator's office, were there any memorable constituents that came to your office? Kind of what made them stand out? And in turn, did that affect change in decision making? And I think you kind of touched on it right there. Is your experience in the senator's office kind of helped you figure out, how to make you guys stand out?
Yeah, so I'll share 2 stories here. Number one, the way I was able to get the unpaid internship and then the position working in the press office, I mentioned was through Washington days. But what I didn't mention is when I had an inhibitor, like any inhibitor patient, cost is astronomical. When you look at your explanation of benefits, EOBs, by month, it's easily over $1 million when you're looking at the cost associated with it. So when I went down, when I was part of the National Youth Leadership Institute, it was recommended that we bring an EOB. And so it was 1 month back in 2004, and it was over $1 million is what my insurance company had paid for the clotting factor. This wasn't even a hospitalization at the time. And I made a copy and I gave it to the staff member, and she was blown away. Like she thought it was photoshopped. She thought it wasn't accurate. And I said, no, this is accurate here. And unbeknownst to me, 5-6 months later, I get a phone call from the same staff person and said, I have been looking at your EOB for the past couple of months and thinking about why does anyone have these type of bills associated with their health to keep them healthy. The senator, who I had never met at the time, is doing a floor speech on the Senate floor about health care and wants to blow this EOB up and use it as an example of the cost of health care. Can we do that? And do you have a photo of yourself to use next to it? And at that point, it's an example that stories make a difference. And I saw that time and time again when I worked at the senator's office, that, when kids in particular came in and they shared where their port is, or they shared that they had leukemia, or they shared how they lost their home, those are the stories that really drive the message home. So I think that anything that can be done to make it more real is always going to be a message that will resonate. This is something that it's actually kind of a funny story because in press, I didn't get to sit in on a lot of the policy meetings because I was more writing the releases and the speeches and, you know, showing up with the camera. But the cool part was I got to show up with the camera because we would post the photos on social media and then, you know, send them out to local papers with a caption. And my favorite story was when Bono came to the office. They were in the meeting, and I was asked not to go to the meeting, but I was asked to get the photo outside. And Bono was walking away, and I yelled, "Excuse me, Bono." And I said, "Can I please get a picture with you and Senator Whitehouse?" And all he did, I will never forget this, is just gave me a little nod, put his arm around the senator, didn't smile, and then just walked away.
Yeah, and what do you call him, Mr. Bono? Or like, you got to just go with Bono, I guess.
Exactly. But I think that that's something, you know, to see celebrities also advocate the way that our community does about things that they're passionate with. You know, I mean, everyone from Blythe Danner to Ted Danson, you know, to Bono to Red Sox players would come in because each person, you know, when you talk about advocacy, is passionate about something. Our community is passionate about healthcare and making sure that we have access because of what we were given, which is a chronic condition. But each person is passionate, and these elected officials are there to listen and to help us navigate this.
I think you hit the nail on the head. It was just having to have a chronic medical condition be with you the rest of your life. It's a pretty powerful story to share. I know that for everybody, going to a state capitol and talking in front of senators about healthcare and share their story can sound very intimidating and scary. And I know there's many other ways to be an advocate. I was hoping you could just kind of share some of those ways that people help advocate for the community that aren't necessarily so, you know, public or so grand.
Often when we think about advocacy, we think of a suit and we think of Washington, D.C. with the dome. But really, advocacy is all around us. Kind of sounds cliche, but it's not just legislation. You know, legislative policy advocacy is one piece, but there are so many other ways to advocate for yourself. You know, advocacy as a parent that has a young child with a bleeding disorder and who is advocating for them that their medication is not working, or that they need a port, or that they need an IEP in school, or going to the school and meeting with the teacher and talking to the nurse. And for a teenager, it's saying to the coach who says, "You can't play basketball." "Yes, I can play. I'm going to get my doctor and PT and social worker and all the key players in here to say that I'm okay with the proper medication and whatever procedure or medical advice that the HCC gives, that I can do this activity." For the college student who goes off and works with their disability office and says, you know, I need a plan in place in case I miss classes, or whatever policy the professor has, whether it's 3 absences, I may go over that because I have a bleeding disorder. So I think that there's so many ways to advocate for yourself, and I think having a chronic condition helps you to be empowered. You know, I think we both have often heard those stories, and we have experienced them when you go to a small emergency room and the doctor and nurses have never met someone with a bleeding disorder, and they're looking at you as if you're an alien and, you know, saying that you infuse your own medication. But I think that that's advocacy too. We're our own experts in this realm. And I think if reaching out to elected officials is intimidating, and when we go back to the policy advocacy side, there are so many ways to do it if showing up to a state house is not your thing. Whether when there's an action alert from the chapter or from the national organizations to actually take action and contact your legislator and share your voice. There are so many easy ways of doing this, whether it's tweeting at them, whether it's Facebooking them, whether it's writing a letter, or whether it's calling them. And it never stops. Just because you've done it once doesn't mean it's over. It's kind of the constant and never-ending evolution of different stages of this advocacy movement. It's really up to us, and it's an example to others on how to advocate for your needs in a professional but yet way where the mission can come across.
I have 2 more questions for you before we wrap up. You mentioned that this is a constant thing that we're going to have to keep dealing with our entire lives, right? With hemophilia and living with a chronic disorder, being our own advocates. How do you stay motivated to continue that work? And when you're kind of feeling that burnout, like how do you get over that hump to get back into it?
I think it's so easy to be burned out. And I think this last year is an example of that that, our community, regardless of whatever side of the aisle someone may be on, is irrelevant. But I think this past year, our community has seen so many action alerts come out and has been fatigued. I've been fatigued having to put them together and having to understand what's happening now and what are we asking people to do. And I think here in New England, the fatigue hits even stronger because we have elected officials who often side with our community in terms of healthcare and in terms of making sure that patients come first for the most part. And I think sometimes it's like, well, why do I need to share my story again and again and again and again? And what I say is if you don't do it, and if we all had that mentality, then who would? Now we're coming to a point of complacency where we're just allowing our voices and the needs of our community to be lost because we're tired and because we're kind of, put the white flag up. And I think when we look at especially the past, I can't think of a more powerful example of advocacy than our community and what happened out of the dark ages of the contaminated blood. And when I look at and read stories of what our community members did that are still around, and many of them who are not, but their legacy, certainly is back to get the Ricky Ray Relief Fund Act in 1998 passed, is the true testament that our voices matter and our voices make a difference. And I think that as we move forward, what I think, the advice would be was that our voices matter and that we can't give up because we're too small to have that mentality that someone else will take over. I think that the more we realize that our efforts are making a difference, because they are. I mean, I can tell you in full confidence that every single letter, at least in the office I worked at, was read by the senator, was responded, and he read the response that went out. If it was a call, it got logged appropriately, and then a report was generated that said 56 people in the past week called about this issue, 26 people called about this issue. So I think that sometimes we think that we make these efforts and they go into an abyss and never to be seen again. But I can at least talk about the office that I worked in, that every single letter, phone call, email was logged appropriately and was tracked and mapped out as to here is where the intake is and these are the issues that we're hearing. So I think that at the end of the day is our voices matter and that we cannot let the mentality that someone else would step in, because really it's up to us and it's our responsibility to continuing to share the stories of our community and the needs.
Awesome. Thanks, Rich. Last question. Our political climate now is pretty tense and there's a lot of changes being made to healthcare and access to healthcare. And it's pretty challenging to kind of stay informed and up to date on all of those things. Do you have any suggestions about how to stay informed for our community around, especially things that can affect our healthcare and our access to that healthcare?
Yeah, that's another great question. It could be dismal when you're looking at all this, as I kind of, reference to in your question about being fatigued. And I think that both national organizations, NHF and HFA, do a good job of communicating. I have to give a shout out to the Hemophilia Federation of America's Friday 5. It's an email that I look forward to every month. They've taken very complex issues and broke it down and here's 5 things you should know that have gone down this past month. What did the shutdown mean that happened for a couple of days? What's the forecast going forward? And that model, I think, is something that we are trying to incorporate here on a local level to communicate to our community. There's a lot going on behind the scenes, but here's the 5 things or 6 things or however many it is that you should know. But I think opening up emails when you see them come out, whether they're action alerts or not, being informed, I think that we're going to be seeing a lot more challenges. It's a really exciting time to have a bleeding disorder. There's so many companies that are working on potential new treatments with gene therapy and some other, treatments that are different than what we're used to. Instead of IV infusions, maybe subcutaneous infusions, maybe there's some other treatments that are out there. But I think that if these products are approved and they go through their clinical trials and show positive results for hemophilia A, hemophilia B, von Willebrand patients, etc., I think that we're going to start seeing insurance companies really potentially take a crackdown and look at the cost and look at what does this mean. And we're going to need to really band together and say treatment advancements are a good thing. Not having access to treatment advancements is not a good thing. And that's going to come with insurance, and that's going to come with advocacy. I think my biggest advice is don't wait until it's too late. Don't wait until you get that phone call from your insurance company that says you're denied and you're not getting your factor or you don't have access to this treatment. Be informed now. Write things down. Be active, show up to your chapter events, work with your chapter to try to get to national events, apply for scholarships, be an informed consumer because that will only help our community in the long haul. But I agree with you. It is a dismal, it can be depressing climate when you look at what is happening. But I do think that our voices are powerful, and working with our legislators who are human beings as well to share our stories can only help to further the mission, which is quality of life for people with the bleeding disorder.
I agree with you, Rich. We have an incredibly powerful community when our voices is shared and together. I think we'll make it through this challenging time together, like we always seem to do, but it does take everybody. So thank you so much for taking some time today to share your story of how you're an amazing advocate and how you've really turned your chapter of the New England Hemophilia Association into just a major player in advocacy, which is really cool to see. Please, everybody, check out their Facebook page and follow to see what they're up to. We'll also put in the program notes links to the HFA Friday 5, and we'll put a link to that and as well as to NHF's Washington Days page. So you can kind of check out what's going on there. And thank you so much. That is a wrap for episode 12 of Ask the Expert. And next week, we will be back with another expert interview. See y'all.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone.
Have you checked out Living with Hemophilia yet? If you have, kudos to you. Not only are you eager to join this exciting community of discourse and helpful information, you're also a keen listener and patron of the arts. But if you haven't taken a swim through livingwithhemophilia.com, take a moment to pull it up on the old internet. I think you're going to love it. Helpful content, relevant updates, and most of all, a bunch of people going through the same things you are. It's a growing part of the online Living with Hemophilia community brought together by the good people at Bayer. Also, put it on your Facebook to-do list. Hit the like button on Living with Hemophilia's Facebook page. It's a good alternative to looking at the slideshow of your neighbor's recent foot surgery. I mean, unless you're into that sort of thing. Living with Hemophilia from Bayer. Check it out.
BloodstreamMedia.com is your one-stop shop for all Bloodstream Media's podcasts for the bleeding disorder community. Once on BloodstreamMedia.com, don't forget to follow the links to subscribe to the Bloodstream Podcast, Ask the Expert Podcast, the Powering Through Podcast, and the Bloodline Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Have an idea for a future episode of Ask the Expert? Have a question that you would like to hear an expert answer? Email us at mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com. You'll also find Bloodstream Media on Facebook at facebook.com/Bloodstream Media and on Twitter at BloodstreamInfo. This episode of Ask the Expert was written by Chris Bombardier, produced by Patrick James Lynch, Rob Bradford, Joshua Sterling Bragg, Avra Friedman, and Colby Crow. Artwork by Ryan Geelan and Katie Ray Mead, and the Ask the Expert pod is edited by Allison Stoney. I'm your host, Chris Bombardier, and until next time, keep on climbing.